Aboard the massive research station orbiting a dying star, the brightest minds of the galaxy gathered to witness something unprecedented. The conference hall, filled with towering Zelvans, multi-eyed Vrith, and the insectoid Jakar, fell silent as a single human took the stage. Dr. Elias Carter was an anomaly, not because he was human, but because he had been invited at all. The Galactic Science Consortium did not often entertain species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. Humanity was seen as ambitious but ultimately backward, their theories primitive compared to the vast intelligence of the older races. Yet, here stood Elias, unshaken by the skeptical gazes drilling into him. With a flick of his wrist, a holographic projection materialized behind him, displaying a series of equations that sent a ripple through the audience. The Vrith delegation muttered amongst themselves, their tendrils twitching in confusion. The Jakar scientists, known for their silence, clicked their mandibles in agitation. Even the Zelvans, with their supposed superior intellect, narrowed their bioluminescent eyes. Elias didn't pause. You see, for centuries, your understanding of physics has been flawed. You have built your theories on assumptions that no one ever thought to challenge. Faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, even the basic structure of the universe itself. A scoff interrupted him. A Zelvan elder, his translucent head pulsing with irritation, stood. Human, your species has barely left its home system, and you dare claim to rewrite the very foundation of science. You have not even reached the third tier of universal understanding, yet you stand before us as if you have solved what we could not. Elias smiled. That's the problem. You assume intelligence follows a linear progression. That the oldest species must always be the most advanced. But intelligence doesn't work that way. Innovation doesn't work that way. Sometimes, an outsider sees what a master overlooks. A murmuring filled the hall again. The arrogance of humanity was known, but this was different. Elias wasn't just boasting. He was daring them to listen. He gestured to the equations again. This formula here, it proves that your understanding of dark energy is incorrect. You assume it to be a force when in reality it's a consequence, a byproduct of a deeper interaction in the fundamental structure of reality. A Vrith scientist rose abruptly. Impossible. The calculations for dark energy have been settled for millennia. No civilization has ever disproven them. Elias tilted his head. That's because you never questioned them. A sharp silence fell. Elias stepped forward, a confident gleam in his eyes. Let me show you something. Your own experiments have overlooked a simple factor. If you apply my corrections and rerun your calculations, you will see that your assumptions were wrong. The universe doesn't expand because of dark energy, it expands because you are observing it incorrectly. The chamber erupted. Scientists debated in their native tongues. Some dismissed him outright. Others frantically cross-checked his equations. But one thing was clear, he had planted doubt. A Zelvan physicist, the foremost expert on spatial distortions, spoke after several minutes of intense calculation. If these equations are correct, then we have miscalculated the fundamental interactions of matter and energy at cosmic scales. Elias nodded. Yes, and that's just the beginning. The shock in the room was palpable. For centuries the galaxy's most advanced minds had believed they understood the universe. That they had reached the pinnacle of knowledge. But now a single human, a representative of a species they had dismissed, had thrown everything into question. And for the first time in millennia the greatest scientists in the galaxy were forced to rethink everything they thought they knew. The research station remained in a state of controlled chaos. Elias had done more than challenge their understanding, he had shattered their certainty. The most esteemed minds of the galaxy now huddled in frantic discussions, cross-referencing equations, running simulations, and re-examining principles they had never before questioned. Elias watched it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction. He wasn't here for personal glory. He was here because he knew the truth had been buried under centuries of unquestioned tradition. He had expected resistance, but what surprised him was how quickly doubt spread. Even the most stubborn scientists couldn't ignore the calculations staring them in the face. The Zelvan elder who had first dismissed Elias now stood before him, his bioluminescent gaze flickering with something between frustration and reluctant admiration. Your equations suggest that our understanding of cosmic expansion is flawed, but such a claim cannot be proven by numbers alone. We require physical evidence. Elias was ready for this. I anticipated that, which is why I brought something you can't ignore. He tapped his wrist console, and the central holographic display changed. A new projection materialized, showing footage taken from a human research vessel. The image displayed a sector of space no galactic scientist had ever studied closely, because, according to their theories, it was empty. But it wasn't. The footage showed anomalies, distortions in light, strange gravitational fluctuations. Then, to the shock of everyone present, the recording captured something impossible. A shift. Space itself rippled, bent, and then snapped into a new configuration. Gasps echoed through the hall. The Vrith delegation recoiled, their tendrils trembling. The Jacquard clicked in rapid succession, a clear sign of distress. The Zelvans went eerily still. This is the proof you need, Elias said calmly. Your theories state that space is expanding at a constant rate, but this footage proves that space can contract under the right conditions. Something is missing from your equations, and I found it. One of the Vrith scientists spoke, his voice laced with disbelief. This cannot be real. No natural phenomenon behaves this way. Elias nodded. Exactly, because it's not natural, it's artificial. This is the first recorded evidence of an ancient technology capable of altering spacetime at will. Another wave of chaos surged through the room. Elias had just made a secondary claim that was even more earth-shattering than the first. Not only was their understanding of the universe flawed, but someone, some unknown force, had already figured it out long before any of them. The Zelvan elder clenched his jaw. If this is true, then it means the very foundation of galactic physics has been based on incomplete data. We have assumed that our laws of nature were absolute, but in reality they are simply a fraction of the truth. Elias folded his arms. And if I'm right, then our entire approach to science needs to change. You've been studying what you thought was the full picture, when in reality you've been staring at a keyhole. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't disbelief or anger, it was something deeper. Fear. If space could be controlled, if the very fabric of reality could be manipulated, then what else had they failed to understand? Elias took a breath. He wasn't done yet. There's more, and if you're willing to listen, I can prove that humanity has already taken the first step toward unlocking this power. The conference hall had transformed into a war zone of scientific debate. Some species outright rejected Elias's claims, calling them human arrogance, while others hesitated, their minds unwilling to discard centuries of established knowledge. But a select few, the ones truly dedicated to discovery, had begun recalculating, rethinking, and most importantly, listening. Elias stood firm, knowing he had them right where he wanted them. Doubt had taken root. Now it was time to shatter the last barrier holding them back. He tapped his wrist console again. The hologram shifted to a new display, data pulled directly from a human research station orbiting a neutron star. The screen showed a controlled anomaly, a ripple in spacetime generated intentionally by human technology. The anomaly expanded, wavered, then stabilized into something unnatural. A fixed point of spacetime distortion. This isn't a naturally occurring phenomenon, Elias said evenly. This was created by us. Humanity has already begun manipulating the structure of the universe at will. A sharp, high-pitched noise came from the Jacquard delegation, a sound of disbelief and distress. The Vrith scientists, known for their cold logic, displayed visible unease. Even the Zelvans, who prided themselves on their intellectual superiority, looked shaken. A Zelvan physicist stepped forward, her voice unusually uncertain. This would mean you have discovered a force beyond the four fundamental interactions. You're claiming that you've accessed something beyond the limits of known physics. Elias nodded. That's exactly what I'm claiming, and the reason the rest of the galaxy hasn't found it is because you were looking in the wrong place. The Vrith scientist who had doubted him earlier spoke, his tendrils twitching nervously. Explain. Elias expanded the holographic display, zooming in on a complex energy pattern surrounding the anomaly. For centuries you have assumed that all forces in the universe stem from known fundamental interactions: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. But what if there was a fifth force, one that you overlooked because your equations didn't allow for it? The room froze. The concept of a fifth fundamental force was something discussed only in theoretical fringe science. Even the most daring minds had dismissed it centuries ago as an impossibility. Elias continued undeterred. Humanity started looking into this when we noticed small inconsistencies in certain high-energy experiments, things that didn't add up. Then we realized something: every major galactic civilization follows the same scientific lineage dating back to the first great empires. Your knowledge isn't just old, it's inherited unquestioned for millennia. A murmur spread through the room. You assumed your understanding was complete, but humanity started from scratch with no preconceived biases. That's why we saw what you missed. We found traces of a force interacting with spacetime at a level so fundamental that it was invisible to traditional equations. We called it the lattice effect, the hidden framework of the universe. The silence was deafening. The Zelvan elder spoke carefully. If what you say is true, then it means the entire structure of reality can be rewritten. Elias met his gaze unwavering. Not just rewritten, controlled. The implications sent shockwaves through the gathered scientists. If humanity had truly uncovered a missing piece of the universe's foundation, then they had taken a step no other species had. Humanity had broken past the limits of known science and stepped into the realm of creation itself. Elias let the weight of his words settle before delivering his final blow. And if we could do this with our limited knowledge, then imagine what we could accomplish if we worked together. The silence stretched on. The assembled scientists were no longer just skeptical, they were shaken to their core. The very foundation of galactic science had been built on what they believed were absolute truths, yet here stood a human proving that their reality was nothing more than a half-finished equation. A Vrith physicist finally broke the silence, his tendrils trembling slightly. You claim your people have already begun harnessing this lattice effect. If that is true, then you must have experimental results. Can you demonstrate an application beyond theoretical models? Elias smiled. That was exactly the question he had been waiting for. Without a word he tapped his wrist console and the holographic display shifted once again. This time it showed footage from a classified human research station orbiting a distant black hole. The recording began with a standard view of the facility, a series of rotating structures powered by fusion reactors and gravitational field stabilizers. Then the footage jumped to an experiment in progress. A small metallic probe was launched directly toward the black hole's event horizon. Normally anything crossing that boundary would be lost forever, swallowed by the singularity's infinite gravity, but then something impossible happened. The probe stopped. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Scientists across dozens of species leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. The probe was hovering at the very edge of the event horizon, untouched, unconsumed. Elias let them process what they were seeing before speaking again. What you're witnessing is the first successful stabilization of matter in a region of spacetime where nothing should be able to exist. The Zelvan elder's bioluminescent eyes flickered wildly. That is impossible. Not even light can escape an event horizon. The very fabric of reality collapses at that boundary. Elias nodded. Exactly, but only if you assume reality follows your laws. The lattice effect allows us to bypass those limitations. We aren't defying gravity, we're rewriting the way space interacts with mass at a fundamental level. A Jacquard scientist clicked his mandibles rapidly. How does your species have the technology to manipulate something we cannot even detect? Elias turned to him, his expression calm but firm. Because we weren't looking for a new force, we were looking for the flaws in yours. The chamber erupted again. Voices clashed in heated debate. Some still refused to accept what they were seeing. Others were already furiously recalculating equations on their personal consoles, trying to find any logical explanation for what humanity had achieved. One of the Vrith scientists, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. If you are telling the truth, then this changes everything. It means we have been looking at the universe through a broken lens. If reality can be rewritten at will, then the implications are beyond anything we have ever imagined. Elias took a step forward, his eyes scanning the room. You're beginning to understand. This isn't just a new discovery, it's a revolution, and I'm offering you a choice. You can dismiss what I've shown you and cling to outdated knowledge, or you can work with us and together we can unlock the true nature of the universe. The room fell into a deep hush. The most brilliant minds in the galaxy had just been presented with a truth they had never even considered, and for the first time in recorded history it was a human leading the way into the unknown. As the debate raged on, Elias stood still, watching as the room shifted from skepticism to reluctant acceptance. The Jacquard clicked their mandibles in a slow, rhythmic pattern, a sign they were deep in thought. The Zelvans, so used to being the ones leading the charge of discovery, were now caught in a paradox. Doubt had seeped into their confidence. The Vrith delegation was the quietest, their multi-eyed stares scanning the data over and over, trying to find an error, a mistake, a miscalculation. But there was none. Elias knew this was a turning point. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. If humanity could force the galaxy to rethink the very structure of reality, what would that mean for the future? What could they accomplish together with this newfound understanding? But even as the questions stirred in his mind, he knew there would be consequences. Not everyone would accept this. There would be those who would fight to preserve their power, their status quo. One of the Zelvan delegates, a young scientist with sharp, calculating eyes, spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of authority despite her youth. Human, what you propose, what you show us, could create a new scientific paradigm, but the question remains, are we truly prepared to wield such power? Elias met her gaze, his expression unwavering. That's the exact question I'm asking you. A murmur rippled through the room. The implications of what he had shown them were staggering. Manipulating spacetime, controlling forces they had once believed absolute, it was a power beyond anything they had ever imagined. It was no longer just about scientific progress, it was about responsibility. The potential for both incredible advancement and catastrophic destruction was now within reach. A quiet voice broke through the murmur. It was the elder Zelvan scientist who had first scoffed at Elias's theory. His voice was raspy, yet there was a tremor of uncertainty in his words. And if we fail, what if we open doors that we cannot close? What if this power consumes us all? Elias's eyes softened, his tone careful. That's why we need to work together to prevent mistakes, to ensure we don't misuse what we found. Humanity may have uncovered this power, but we are only at the beginning. We have to pool our knowledge, our wisdom. We can't risk repeating the same mistakes the galaxy made in the past. The room grew quiet again. Elias felt the weight of their gaze, each one searching for an answer, a glimpse of hope that their combined intelligence could steer this new era towards something better rather than something catastrophic. Then, a voice rose above the rest, a voice that had been silent throughout most of the discussion. The Vrith leader, known for her emotional restraint, spoke with a piercing clarity that made everyone stop. What you are asking us to do is unprecedented. To put our trust in a species that has only recently left the cradle of its homeworld is not a decision we take lightly. Elias didn't flinch. I understand that, but think of what we could achieve together. Imagine harnessing the true power of the galaxy itself, understanding the forces that govern everything, life, energy, time. You could break the limits of your own people's biology, extend lifespans beyond what we thought possible. You could reshape entire worlds to suit the needs of your people. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle in. But more than that, we could ensure that nothing like the previous great wars or the mistakes of old ever happens again. We could guide this galaxy to a future where knowledge is shared, where the destruction of one species doesn't mean the end of the universe. The silence lingered, but this time it wasn't a silence of doubt. It was the kind of silence that came before monumental decisions, the kind of silence that held the weight of 1,000 futures. Elias knew he had reached them. Finally, the Jakar representative stood, his long, segmented limbs moving slowly as he raised a clawed hand. You speak with conviction, human, he said after a long pause, but the path you propose is fraught with risk. If we are to take this step, it must be with great care. Elias nodded. I agree, but if we do nothing, if we cling to outdated knowledge, we risk stagnation, just as the universe itself risks entropy. We cannot afford to sit idly by while the true potential of our existence remains locked away. The Zelvan elder spoke again, his voice softer now, almost thoughtful. What you have shown us is beyond anything we could have imagined. Perhaps we have underestimated humanity, but before we can proceed, we must ask ourselves one final question. Are we ready to let go of everything we thought we knew and take this leap into the unknown? Elias stood taller, his heart racing with anticipation. That's the question we all have to answer, but the first step has already been taken. The galaxy has been forced to reconsider what it knows about the universe. The next step is ours to take together. The room had grown quieter still. The scientists, leaders, and delegates of every species in the galaxy now stood at the precipice of a new era, an era that could either catapult them to unimaginable heights or plunge them into ruin. For the first time in history, it wasn't just the most advanced species or the oldest civilizations who held the future in their hands, it was humanity. And with that recognition came an immense responsibility. Elias felt the weight of their stares, their skepticism, their hope, and their fear. He had known this moment would come, the moment when his discoveries would no longer just be about knowledge but about action. There was no turning back now. A young Vrith scientist, one of the few who had been quiet for most of the discussion, raised her hand. She was not speaking for herself, but for many of her people. The Vrith were pragmatic, and their cautious approach to change was both their strength and their weakness. "Human," she began, her voice steady, but carrying an underlying tension. "You have given us a glimpse into a future we never thought possible. But with that power, what guarantees do we have that we will not repeat the mistakes of the past? How do we ensure that this discovery, this new force, will not be abused by those who seek to control it for their own gain?" The question hung in the air. Elias understood it well. The galaxy had seen its fair share of empires rise and fall, each fueled by unchecked ambition, and there was always the fear that history would repeat itself. The temptation to wield ultimate power, to shape the galaxy according to one's desires, was a constant lurking danger. Elias took a deep breath. "I won't lie to you," he said, his voice firm. "This power can be used for great good, but it can also be used for unimaginable harm. That's why we must not move forward as isolated species. We must build a coalition, a council, made up of representatives from every species, every race, and every voice in the galaxy. Only through unity can we ensure that this knowledge doesn't fall into the wrong hands." The Jacquard, who had been listening intently, now clicked their mandibles in rapid succession. Their species was known for their sense of collective responsibility, but they were also deeply distrustful of others, particularly those who wielded immense power. The idea of a coalition was one they could support, but only if it meant equal accountability for all involved. "I agree," the Jacquard representative said slowly. "But how do we ensure that the coalition is truly equal? How do we know that one species, even humanity, won't dominate the others, imposing its will upon those who are weaker or less advanced?" Elias met the Jacquard's gaze. "That's why we can't let this be about any one species or empire. It has to be a collective effort, based on mutual respect, mutual benefit. No single species can hold this power alone. If we are to unlock the true potential of the lattice effect, we must do so with shared responsibility, not dominance." The Zelvans, who had remained quiet for some time, now spoke. Their voices were always measured, but the gravity of this moment was clear even in their usually composed tones. "If humanity's calculations are correct," they began, their bioluminescent skin flickering with slight hesitation, "then we have a responsibility to share this knowledge with all. We must not let fear or suspicion guide our actions, but rather the pursuit of truth and advancement. But there is one thing we must ask before we proceed. Are you truly ready to handle the consequences of what you propose?" The room fell silent once more. The question was not just for Elias, it was for every species present. The realization that they stood on the brink of discovering something so profound, so potentially dangerous, weighed heavily on all of them. They had already seen the consequences of unchecked power, war, destruction, and the death of entire civilizations. They had witnessed the fall of empires that once believed they were invincible. And now, they were about to take a step into the unknown. Elias stood tall, his gaze unwavering. He had known the risks from the start. But he also knew that humanity had always been driven by one unshakable truth, the desire to learn, to grow, and to move forward. The alternative was stagnation, and that was a path they could never afford to walk. "We are ready," Elias said, his voice calm but resolute. "We have already unlocked the first steps. We've already proven it can be done. Now, the only question left is whether we are willing to work together, to take this step into the future as a united galaxy, or if we will let fear and suspicion tear us apart." The silence in the room was deafening. The weight of the decision was felt by everyone present. It was no longer just about science. It was about the future of the galaxy, and whether they would allow the potential for greatness to slip through their fingers or embrace it with open arms. Finally, the Jacquard representative spoke, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken resolve. We agree, humanity. We will work together, but the future will depend on what we do now. We cannot afford to fail. And with those words, the first step toward a new era was taken. The galaxy was no longer divided by old boundaries and outdated ideologies. For the first time, all species stood united in their shared pursuit of knowledge, power, and progress. And while the future was still uncertain, one thing was clear: together, they would rewrite the rules of the universe. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The Council formed quickly, a coalition of species more diverse than any the galaxy had ever seen. Delegates from each species, Zelvan, Vrith, Jacquard, and humanity, met in a newly constructed space station located at the neutral center of the galaxy, designed specifically for the purpose of collaboration. It was the first of its kind, a symbol of what was possible when the galaxy united for a common cause. Elias stood at the head of the table, his heart pounding as he looked at the representatives of every species gathered before him. The challenge was no longer theoretical. Now they had to work together to unlock the secrets of the lattice effect and harness its power responsibly. The tension in the room was palpable. Every species had its own fears, its own agenda. But there was also something else, a sense of cautious hope. A Zelvan scientist spoke first, her voice calm but carrying the weight of their centuries-old tradition. We must ensure that our discoveries do not fall into the hands of those who would misuse them. If the lattice effect can truly manipulate spacetime itself, then it is a power that could reshape entire systems, even entire galaxies. What safeguards are we putting in place? Elias nodded. The first safeguard is transparency. Every research station, every experiment, every data set will be shared openly among the coalition. No one species will control this knowledge. It will belong to all of us. But we also need to establish an oversight committee, an unbiased body of scientists and leaders from all species, whose sole responsibility is to ensure that this power is used for the collective good. The Jacquard representative clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. And what of those who refuse to comply? Those who see this power as a tool for domination rather than unity? You speak of safeguards, but they will be meaningless if there are factions that act outside the Council's reach. Elias took a deep breath. He knew this question was coming. That's why we must also create a response protocol, a system that holds every member of the coalition accountable. If any species attempts to weaponize the lattice effect or use it for their own gain, the Council will have the authority to impose immediate sanctions, including the suspension of their participation in the project. We cannot afford to be passive. We must be proactive in ensuring that this discovery remains a force for good. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. It was a bold plan, but it was also necessary. The galaxy had seen too many great powers fall into the hands of those who sought to control, to dominate. They couldn't afford to let the same thing happen again. A Vrith scientist, who had remained quiet for much of the discussion, finally spoke, his voice filled with a cautious but growing sense of urgency. This is unprecedented. The discovery of the lattice effect is not just a new scientific breakthrough, it is a new way of thinking about the very fabric of existence. If we are to harness this power, we must be willing to let go of everything we thought we knew about the universe. We cannot continue to hold on to old ideas, old prejudices. We must be willing to embrace a new paradigm of cooperation, where every species contributes equally, and no one is left behind. Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the room. The words of the Vrith scientist resonated with him. This wasn't just about science. It was about the future of the galaxy. About how they chose to shape their destiny. The human representative, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What Elias has shown us is a glimpse of what we can achieve together. But we cannot forget that it is our differences, our diverse experiences, our varied cultures, that will make this work. It is not just the science that will guide us, but the shared belief that we are better when we collaborate, when we learn from one another. Elias felt a surge of pride in his chest. For all the challenges, all the doubts, humanity had brought the galaxy together. It was no longer just the old powers that ruled, but a collective effort that transcended species, boundaries, and histories. They had all come to this moment, not as isolated factions, but as a unified whole. As the discussions continued, strategies were laid out for how to proceed. The first phase of research was underway, with stations established across various regions of the galaxy to study the lattice effect in real-world conditions. Each species contributed their unique expertise: Zelvan quantum theory, Vrith energy manipulation, Jacquard biological adaptations, and human ingenuity. They were not just scientists, they were partners, learning from each other, pushing the boundaries of what they thought was possible. Months passed, and the results began to show. The lattice effect was proving to be even more versatile than they had imagined. It could stabilize dying stars, create artificial wormholes, and even heal damaged planets. The potential for good seemed limitless. But with each breakthrough, Elias and the Council were reminded of the delicate balance they had to maintain. Every step forward had to be taken with care, with the full understanding that the slightest mistake could unravel everything. The day came when they made their most ambitious experiment yet. A massive structure was built, a station at the edge of a black hole, where the lattice effect would be used to manipulate the event horizon itself. The goal was to stabilize the black hole long enough to create a safe pathway through it, opening up a new corridor to distant galaxies. If successful, this would revolutionize travel and exploration. As the final countdown began, Elias stood before the Council, the weight of their combined effort resting on his shoulders. The entire galaxy was watching, waiting to see what they would achieve. The lattice effect had the potential to change everything, but it was still a risk. In that moment, Elias felt something he had never expected: a sense of unity, a sense of hope for the future. The galaxy, once divided by old conflicts and old prejudices, had come together for something greater than any of them. They had taken the first step into the unknown, not as individuals, but as a collective. And for the first time in history, it wasn't humanity that had to prove itself to the galaxy, it was the galaxy that had to prove it was ready for what humanity had discovered. The machine powered up, and a ripple of energy coursed through the station. Time seemed to stretch as the galaxy held its breath. Then, with a brilliant flash, the event horizon shifted, the black hole stabilized, and the pathway opened. It was a success. The lattice effect had been controlled, and the galaxy had taken its first step into a new era. As Elias looked around the room, he knew that this was just the beginning. They had forced the galaxy to rethink science. But now, they had to rethink everything else: how they would use this power, and whether they would rise to the challenge of shaping a better future for all.